views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hey there, welcome to the Bronx Buzz. This is BronxNet's program where we talk to reporters and editors and writers and videographers and filmmakers and anybody who's putting stuff out in the borough of the Bronx. And this evening, we're going to be joined by a top flight reporter, a tech and policy reporter for City and State New York. And in our second segment, you're going to love it, the best artists and the best photographers in the Bronx. There's a new film, and we're going to present a little clip, and you're going to find out all about that. But let's get started with Annie McDonough, who is, as I said, the tech and policy reporter for City and State New York. Nice to have you with us, Annie. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I've got the print publication in front of me. What's next for police reform? My goodness, what a question. Annie took a swat at it, and we appreciate your getting into that. Let's get started, though, just real briefly, so people who know who you are. How did you get into reporting and journalism, and how did you find your way to City and State?
I got into reporting and journalism in high school, fell in love with it there, and I actually got into City and State as an intern. Started out as an intern a few years ago, and when a job opened up as a tech reporter here, I very, very happily applied for it, and things worked out very well.
That's a nice clue to my interns, Jalen and Christine, to tell them, hey, you know, this is kind of how it works. One thing we do want to know, where were you? Where did you grow up? Where did you live? Where did you go to that high school? Yeah. And then we'll put you here in the borough of the Bronx.
I'm from Delaware originally, so not too far away, but certainly very different from New York and very different from New York City. Went to college upstate near Utica, a place called Colgate University in Hamilton, New York, and have been in New York City since graduation.
And here you are. All right, let's roll up our sleeves and get to it. The Rochester police force was under significant pressure after the shooting of Daniel Prude. They have, and I'm pulling it right out of your article, the Person in Crisis Program and the Forensic Intervention Team. In cases of potential mental illness, those teams are supposed to be called in. Is this an effective way of kind of revising how we handle our police responses to cases with mental illness, and will it keep people safer? Sure, answer that one.
It's a big question. I think it's a start. Daniel Prude died of suffocation. He was experiencing a mental health crisis during the interaction with cops. I think for a lot of people who watched that happen, it was just another case of a failure of officers to adequately respond to someone in a mental health crisis. Rochester, the city, has set up since then the new team you mentioned, the Person in Crisis Team. It's a crisis intervention counselor and a social worker who are sent in to respond to mental health calls instead of the police. I say it's a start because it's a pilot program. It's about 16 people now. I think they have plans to expand to 30 or so later this month. It's a start. There are flaws in the program that many people have pointed out, but it's part of a larger trend, I think, that we're seeing to start happening around the state, certainly in New York City as well, in terms of our police, the right people to respond to these calls, and should they be removed from the equation entirely?
You know, one of the questions, and I don't really want to spend a lot of time on it because it's being debated probably in every municipality, is how is it paid for? And then if you're going to take that money from traditional police budgets, then of course people are saying, well, now you're defunding the police. On the other hand, it's got to be paid for. It may be a significant piece to proper policing. What are your thoughts? I mean, and how is Rochester paying for it, for example?
Rochester has devoted about $600,000 to it, and the city budget process is happening in later this spring, early summer. And I think we've seen some hints that they will expand the program. There's certainly interest among the city council in expanding the pilot program. But for one example, to answer your question, to take things to New York City a little bit, Diane Morales, one of the Democratic mayoral candidates, has suggested funding a separate city agency of, by and large, mental health professionals to respond to these kinds of calls instead of the police. And that would be funded directly through cuts to the NYPD. That's been her suggestion. Other plans from candidates we haven't seen in quite as much detail. I think that's an open question of how it would be funded. But certainly it's part of the defund or reduction of the budget debate.
Yeah, it's definitely in the middle of it. There's a thing, and you reported, which really is a startling statistic, and that is that people with mental illness are 16 times more likely to get shot in police interactions. That would sound the alarm to me. There's a program that you reported on also called, and I want to get it right, HEARD, right? The BHEARD, the Behavioral Health Emergency Assistance Response Division. The thing that bothers me, I like it because I think it's a good idea and we've got to address this problem. But the thing that bothers me about it is another agency, another bureaucratic thing. And one of the issues with Daniel Prude, as I understand, and you reported, is that program did not kick in because of the way the dispatchers described it in the 911 call, and they weren't aware that it was about a stolen car, and they weren't aware that it was for a mental health program. A problem that's an issue. I mean, we've all got to speak the same language,
right? And so you're talking about the PIC team, the person in crisis team, PIC
Yes.
team for short. A lot of acronyms in this space, but that was set up earlier this year after Daniel Prude, but it was not dispatched in the case of a 9-year-old girl who was experiencing a mental health crisis.
Oh, that's right. That I mixed them up.
But you're
there were
right
so
on.
many. There were so many. How could you keep track?
But all those details you mentioned are absolutely correct. It wasn't dispatched because the original call to 911, in which this girl was involved, was about a stolen car. And once on the scene, officers, for one reason or another, didn't call on the new resources available to them, and the girl was handcuffed and pepper sprayed.
To me, the conclusion of your article was exactly what I think this dialogue is going toward. And that is a couple of legislators are now talking about making it a state program, because otherwise Buffalo, let's talk cities, Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Albany, New York City are going to have to create their own programs, and everybody's going to have, a different way of handling it and a different set of, budgetary considerations, or everybody's going to be speaking a different language. This seems to me to be the way to do this, right? To get our arms around it.
Yeah, I mean, the phrase you use, speaking the same language, is obviously really important here. You can't have sort of crossed wires when it's something as monumental as responding to mental health calls. And yes, the legislation you're speaking about is called Daniel's Law, named after Daniel Prude, sponsored by 2 legislators from the Rochester area. It would basically set in motion a statewide reform process. Regional councils will be set up to decide how best to approach different parts of the state, different cities, but the idea would be on a statewide basis, starting to divert these calls, mental health calls, substance use calls, homelessness calls away from the police.
Yeah, one way or the other. And then again, we're going back in circles. You need to, how's it going to get funded, et cetera. Only have a couple of minutes left, but you talked about, you wrote about this idea of vaccine passports, so that if you're vaccinated, you have it's part of your passport, and then you can be verified in any number of ways and qualify for, certain things. But of course, there are many people who say, hey, if I don't want to take the vaccine, why should I be, persecuted against or not have other opportunities other people have? What are your thoughts on that, and where do you think this is headed?
So New York had to sort of be first out of the gate on this. We were the first state to launch a vaccine passport app, like what you're talking about. They call it Excelsior Pass. It's a bit of a misnomer because you can generate this passport. It's a QR code. And if you're going into a concert venue, a baseball stadium, any businesses that signed on to use this, they'll scan it and say, you've been vaccinated, come on in. It will also accept a recent negative COVID test result though. So it's not just vaccinations, but it's absolutely correct that there's a ton of apprehension around this because of civil liberties, things like if I choose not to get vaccinated, maybe I have antibodies, should I not be let into this business? But it's also because of privacy and concerns about equity and vaccination distribution not being equitable quite yet. So it's raised all these concerns. But
so I guess the answer to my question of where's this going, we don't know. I mean, this could go all the way to the Supreme Court. I mean, that would, in other words, the controversy is that large.
I think, and I think the question is how widely we see it adopted, because right now it's just places like Madison Square Garden, these big venues. I think if we start to see smaller businesses and restaurants sign on to this, if they're asking for your vaccine passport or other proof of vaccination, which they're also required to accept, to enter a grocery store, I think you're going to see a larger outcry and controversy over this. There are also those who think it's a great idea, though.
Well, right now, for example, both Yankee Stadium and Citi Field, you've got to show proof, but that's a private enterprise. I realize there's a public nature to it, but it's a private enterprise, and if they believe that they want to, protect their situation and also certainly their clients, then they're I presumably legally entitled to do that. Anyway, Annie McDonough, it is just a pleasure to have you for the first time on the Bronx Buzz, and I'm guessing that this will be the first of many, and I hope that's true.
Thanks so much for having me. I'd love to come back.
Great. Annie McDonough from City and State, New York. When we come back, you know what? I got the book here. I'm going to show you this book. We're going to show Annie the book too. This is the Bronx documentary, Bronx Artist. I'm hiding behind it. The Bronx Artist Documentary Project. One of the most exciting artistic projects, is not only a project and a book, now it's a film. We'll be right back with that. Don't go away.